Hey, Chris, Duff over at Serious Land Capital, vacant land funding partner. Quicker one today here. I just wanted to comment on a question we were getting um, about some specific property characteristics for due diligence on properties, primarily in relation to just creeks or creek beds on properties, and just at its most basic, is this a pro or a con feature? Usually just like kind of blanket statement. I think, oh yeah, creek on a property, possible wetlands, going to be a con. That would be kind of the uh, initial rush conclusion, and oftentimes is accurate for many types of properties. But as is usual within land, um, each area and each particular property and the specific individual characteristics are going to rule the day when it comes down to actual valuations. So in terms of the times that a creek is going to be more negative, primarily if it's running through an anticipated buildable area. So, if you're in an infill type area, or maybe like, a sub 5 acre size parcel on average, rarely will a creek, even if it's along the property boundary lines, like in the back of the property, that's rarely going to be a positive feature. Like at best, it'll be neutral if it's kind of further back. And part of the reason there is because, again, you have fairly limited utility from a just possible usage for land of that size. Like usually you're going to default to some type of structural improvement type of setup for an end buyer, oftentimes residential. I mean, that's going to be our typical exit for most buyers, especially for properties of that size or below. So, especially if there's a creek going through the middle of the property, key building area, even if, the contour is kind of indicating, hey, that there's a little bit of a gap here to work with, to build upon, or, have a driveway to access whatever the primary buildable area is for that property. You have to look at those other type of overlays. Does the creek indicate that there is some type of wetlands? It's not always going to be the case here. Oftentimes there will be, or, a flood zone overlay might be indicated, but, sometimes it's difficult to tell without a site visit, which is always going to be, recommended, especially for higher priced properties. And we won't buy anything sight unseen. So sometimes the contour of the property based on the aerial can indicate, hey, there might be a possible creek bed here, or you have like a neighboring parcel where there's, some type of wetlands or what appears to be a creek or flood zone that might, extend onto the property, but it's not 100% clear. So in cases like those, you have to have your antenna up for possible further investigation. And even if that's not a wet area, you're going to incur extra costs from an end buyer perspective. Anybody who wants to build on it, doing various dirt work and so forth, which, depending on the area, can get fairly pricey in order to set up the land to be built upon. That should kind of cover scenarios like that where you can kind of see, it's typically going to be a more negative feature on those smaller types of properties. Where it can change a bit is, for those larger rural properties, again, at minimum 5 acres plus. Ideally, you'd like to see probably 10 acres plus, just to account for extra potential from a recreational perspective. That's usually where we'll see, 10 acres being more of a minimum there. That, tweener range of 5 to 10 acres, it really is dependent on the area and how many surrounding neighbors there might be, or, is it abutting is the parcel abutting any kind of public land or you land that can basically be utilized publicly. I kind of just repeated that, but whether it is owned federally at the state level, even community-wise, there can be a whole bunch of different options there. So that then all of a sudden some of those smaller parcels can be more attractive because you have effectively a larger backyard, even if it's not directly within those property boundaries. So, worthwhile distinction included there, but even so, there is some possibility for higher level rec potential on sub 10 acre properties in particular areas of the country, but it's rare compared to 10 acre plus. So in situations like those, if you're going to have a creek bed that is much closer to the anticipated road frontage, or maybe you have easement access to the particular property, and it's still going to be tricky from an anticipated structural improvement side of things, to again do various dirt work or potential wetlands that can affect even the right to build. And I completely forgot to mention too is that even if you had wetlands, flood zone, whatever, you always want to check your soil overlays, because in areas that there's not direct sewer line access, the chance of installing septic, especially a conventional septic system, is going to be much higher risk in those areas that might be wet or have more difficult soils to work with, especially if they're tagged with excess water, and nearby floods or nearby flood zones or wetlands, which you can see on a lot of mapping softwares, Land ID in particular. So that's just another piece to note, where even if a creek is super narrow on the actual property and the contour, like the impact on the terrain itself from a structural improvement perspective could be much wider than it might look visually initially. So that's always, it should trigger you to be thinking more carefully about situations like that. So, going back to those larger properties, obviously if kind of the buildable area might be impacted, it's still going to be a negative. But if it's further back in the property, or particularly closer to the boundary, or back boundary or side boundary of a property, and usually with creeks you're going to get some type of decline in contour, so you always want to account for that, how that might affect buildability as well there too. But especially in areas that there's more rec potential, particularly hunting is where it usually comes down to. Having creek access can be a big plus, because it'll tend to attract wildlife. I'm not a hunter myself. That's I can't really speak from deep levels of experience personally on that, but just having reviewed a lot of land over the years, and a lot of recreational land and ones with creek access, plus talking to tons of brokers who are local to these various areas, we feel like we've accumulated enough kind of expertise, even outside of personal hunting expertise, to realize, okay, when there is a creek in some of these larger parcels that's outside that buildable area, that is typically going to be a plus, because you just kind of think about it biologically, animals tend to congregate around where water sources are, or the various predator-prey scenarios. That every organism has to drink water at some point. So that's the foundation of life. So that, from a logical perspective, it makes a lot of sense there. And you can just, double check all those assumptions yourself. Look at all the various sold comps or, active comps, and what are the properties that tend to be labeled as, hunting properties more typically, or have game footage. Oftentimes they'll have a creek nearby more often than not. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind and have, as a trigger as you're starting to assess more of these properties. So that is more of the primary situation where I would view a creek as, much larger positive. But outside of that type of scenario, usually it's going to be a negative there. So bottom line, sizing, and usage of the property, those are going to be your guidelines for creeks impacting your due diligence and anticipated exit price. Again, always ask more questions than you even think necessary. It's very easy to get fooled in this business, especially if you operate in many different areas like we do. So food for thought. Hopefully this one was helpful. SeriousLand.capital for any of your funding needs for various land deals. We also cover messy title deals now too. Post that Logan Fulmer DPA Summit last weekend here, bringing a lot of inquiries about those. Land Daily Diligence, zero cost review of your land deals, and landpricer.ai for the most simple and accurate way to price land. Already been doing a ton of internal testing with that, so close to launch. With that, take care, everybody. Subscribe and share. Bye.